Good morning, my friends. Welcome. Good to see you. Welcome to those joining on Facebook and YouTube. Happy to have you in the space as well. Just feeling really peaceful right now, so I'm grateful for that. I'm grateful for the tone that everyone's setting here. We have quite a beautiful conversation ahead, and it will include the Mahayana teachings of Shantideva and the Dhammapada of the Buddha. It will also include a Psalm of David and A Course in Miracles, so quite a smorgasbord. We are going to explore this idea of creation and miscreation today. We'll see how all of that fits together through the power of thought. We started a Bible class a couple of weeks ago, and other than the technical glitch that we had on Wednesday, it's been rolling along quite nicely, and it's allowed me to go back into the scriptures and do some really in-depth study. And right now we're kind of working with these ideas of creation on Wednesday night. And if you know the Hebrew tradition in the Genesis account of creation, it's done through speech, it's done through language, and that will of course, be a leitmotif, a theme throughout the entirety of the biblical canon. So you'll get this idea of creative speech in the Psalms. Jesus himself is called the Logos, or the Word, in John's Gospel. And everything is done through this divine language. And we have language as image bearers or representatives or expressions of divinity. And so our language is also within thought. So like when we're thinking, that too is a very subtle language. It's utterance, it's speech. And what we're going to be looking at today is how all of these different levels, the subtle levels of thought and the more gross or manifested levels of physicality, are all interwoven. And we're going to see this through the biblical revelation, but also the Buddhist and the revelation of A Course in Miracles. So I guess we'll start with the familiar message of the Dhammapada. This is considered one of the authentic teachings of the Buddha. So it begins with, our life is shaped by our mind. We become what we think. Suffering follows an evil thought as the wheels of a cart follow the oxen that draw it. Our life is shaped by our mind. We become what we think. Joy follows a pure thought like a shadow that never leaves. So one of the things we want to pick up here, besides the causal nature of thought, is that there's like a pattern or a flow pattern that shows up. So when you have a certain thought, the thought will produce a trace or a track or a karmic result or a pattern as surely as the wheels follow the ox. So there's like this track of a certain kind of road or pathway that your thoughts will put you on. And once you're on that road will lead you into different directions. Like you've chosen to be on that path, and then it goes, kind of like one of those conveyor belts at an airport. And so whether you're thinking with a pure mind or an impure mind, it's setting up these patterns or events in your life. And what we're going to see today in a practical example that was given by A Course in Miracles author Helen Schuckman and her boss and colleague Bill Thetford, is just how our thoughts can create these events in our life that either go well or ill in a very practical way. You'll see how this will play out when we get into the story of how the miscreative thoughts of Helen and Bill set up a series or a cascade of events that seem to redirect their happiness to struggle or strain. And so this is what the Buddha is saying, is that our thoughts are either allowing us to walk on sunlit paths, enjoyable paths, or our thoughts are bringing us into sort of the darker, shadowy struggles of existence. The Buddha goes on, he says, as a strong wind blows down a weak tree, Mara the tempter overwhelms weak people who, eating too much and working too little, are caught in the frantic pursuit of pleasure. As the strongest wind cannot shake a mountain, Mara cannot shake those who are self-disciplined and full of faith. And so what's going on in Buddhism, and what we'll see also in the other traditions as well, is that there's a training, like we are being instructed to train our mind so that we can become solid and centered within the way, right? This is the sort of the generic way of expressing the spiritual path. It's the Tao, or the way. It's what really flows in this divine patterning. And when our thoughts are aligned to the divine source, we're in this effortless flow pattern of divine will, divine direction. And so we are either aligning with it or we are misaligning with it. We are co-creating with it or we are miscreating against it. And the ones that feel it are the ones that think it, right? So that's how this all takes place. You are what you think. Your life is supported or shaped by your thoughts, right? A little bit more from the Buddha here. This is in the 3rd chapter of the Dhammapada, and it's on thought. As an archer aims his arrow, the wise aim their restless thoughts. Hard to aim, hard to restrain. As a fish hooked and left on the sand thrashes about in agony, the mind, being trained in meditation, trembles all over, desperate to escape the hand of Mara. Hard it is to train the mind, which goes where it likes and does what it wants, but a trained mind brings health and happiness. The wise can direct their thoughts, subtle and elusive, wherever they choose. A trained mind brings health and happiness. Okay? Those who can direct thoughts which are unsubstantial and wander so aimlessly are freed from the bonds of Mara, from the tempter, from the dark side. So everything is done within the arena of thoughts. And what's fascinating about being human is that we have this ability to self-reflect and to actually witness or watch the quality of our thoughts. And if you've been on the spiritual path for any while, you'll know clearly that there are really just 2 sources of thought, as the Buddha was just defining. You have the impure or the egoic thoughts, and you have the pure or the spirit-based thoughts. And moment by moment, these thoughts are presented. And what's often the case is human beings are set to a default where we naturally are conditioned to select the egoic, the selfish, the impure thoughts. And as a result, we struggle and we strain through life because we're not training the mind, right? It's just like training the body. And so he was just describing, restraining the thoughts or being aware of the thoughts. It's like going to the gym. And sometimes, going to the gym, it's, we're causing ourselves to move out of our comfort zone. This is how we grow. This is how we develop. This is how we transform. Sometimes we're very comfortable thinking very judgmentally about someone, or we're comfortable and feeling like we really were wronged here. And so I'm the victim and this person is the victimizer. And that becomes very comfortable for us. And as we undergo these transformative teachings, and we begin to train our mind and have introspection, those old stories have to come back for re-examination. And it could be very uncomfortable to take responsibility in certain areas or to clean up our mess with other people where we had a story where they were wrong and we were right. Things of this nature become, uncomfortable at first in the mind training. And then just a bit more here. They are not wise whose thoughts are not steady and minds not serene, who do not know Dharma, the law of life. Now this is going to play in when we go into the Psalm of David. So listen to what he's pointing out here. So those are not wise whose thoughts are not steady, in other words, consistently pure or set on truth, compassion, noble qualities. And if their minds are not serene and they don't know the Dharma or the law of life, and so like we have been saying, there are these deeper patterns of life that the foolish, the untrained mind is ignoring or not aware of. And yet these deeper structures of life, these flow patterns in the divine matrix, are moving all things. And if we are not aligned with these deeper flow patterns, we're going to get off track, we're going to bump, we're going to crash, we're going to careen, we're not going to see the exit when we could have taken that exit and now we got to go all the way around, or we get lost. In other words, we're ignoring the deeper signs. We're not hearing the divine language. Right, so this is why watching the mind, calming the mind, quieting the mind is so very important. Because when you do, you begin to actually sense and flow with this deeper language. You can read it, you can see it, you can be it. Right? So this is where the Buddhist teaching is saying, not only do we control the mind and settle the mind, but then we also attune to Dharma, to this deeper law of life that's governing all life. Right? That's why egoic thinking blocks us from recognizing that we too are expressions of this deeper law of life. So one way of looking at it, and maybe we'll take a little rendezvous into the esoteric for a moment. If you're familiar with, like, let's say the human body and its nervous system, right? It's much like a tree or a vine. And then, of course, the meridian system that the Chinese acupuncturists had discovered thousands and thousands of years ago is more like a very subtle circuitry within the energy body, right? And so this has been well known for many years. What also has been well known, especially thousands and thousands of years ago in shamanic societies elsewhere, is that the earth has its own meridian system. So these ley lines of electromagnetic force and earth energy, if you will, that flow through the planet, if you look, all of these sacred sites are built on these vortex or nexus points throughout the meridian system of the earth. And so we have a meridian system, the earth has a meridian system. And what's fascinating is that the ancients also understood that this circuitry or this meridian system kept going out into the stellar areas. In other words, that the stars are sending these rays of light into the earth, and everything's like this amazing clockwork matrix of energy flow and interconnectivity and like a divine lattice network, right? And so when our thoughts are harmonious, we're integrating all of these different levels, and we're in touch with the divine matrix, which patterns it all. And so now we're going to see how that kind of plays out through the Psalm of David, and how our thoughts, when they're aligned with the law of life, or the Torah Hashem in this case, are going to be joyful, easy, flowing, effortless. So it says here, and kind of doing an on-the-fly translation, because oftentimes you don't get the nuances within the translations. So it's saying that the heavens are speaking forth the glory of God, and the works of his hands are being uttered or revealed through the sky. Day after day, speech flows forth, and night after night, knowledge is uttered. So what they're wanting you to do is get in touch with the living, breathing fabric of creation. Cricket song, bird song, wind, sky, cloud patterns, all of these things are speech. So the ancients had a more visceral connection to this language of life. We've lost it. We've gone into this very objective, conceptual, reductionistic, scientistic view that has really killed off our visceral connection to the law of life. Like Kierkegaard said, how can you ever understand a living system if you're doing an autopsy on it? Because that's what our science does. It breaks up, it slices open. It's looking at things that we have to kill first in order to understand. And so we'll never be in the divine matrix or this flow of divine language if our thought process first removes ourselves from it, kills it off, and then superimposes this false conceptual framework of interpretation. So what this psalm is enticing us to do is enter the flow. And what we'll find also is we don't enter the flow because we have a million different grievances that are flowing in our mind. We have a bunch of different dark cloud patterns of thinking we know already, and we are familiar with what is true and real. And so we're blocking ourselves, and we think we're aware, awake. So the psalm continues. Ein omer ve'ein devarim beli nishma kulam. There is not speech and there are no words without the sound of their frequency or resonance. So in other words, what's being said, and it's very subtle, that's why it's not being picked up in translation. In order to have this language, we have to be already connected to the network of the greater nature. We are nature, and this is nature speaking at a different scale, in a different context, within a different syntax. But it's language, just like the clouds and the wind and cricket song is language. And so when our minds are pure and we're in touch with the law of life, or the Torah Hashem, we can then use this language the way we were designed to use it as co-creators, working with all scales within this divine network or circulatory system. How lovely. And then it says, in all the earth, their kavam, their network, goes forth. So again, they're giving you this, these are lines of force, these are patterns. And then in a moment, he's going to say, the sun follows his circuit by coming out in the east and setting in the west. This consistency of the sun rising and the moon going through her cycles, these are all following lines of force. circuits, networks. Everything is networked, orderly, linguistically structured, but just at different scales of language. Just making sense. Okay, so then, he's giving you this cosmic patterning of the divine language and the sun and how it's going forth and everything like that. And then abruptly, it switches from this display of nature and its symphony of language and structure to the law of God. It's exactly what Buddha was just saying, that when our minds are aligned with Dharma, we are in this flow pattern. So this is what the psalmist is realizing, that the Torah of God, the law or instruction of God, is pure, and it brings rest to the nephesh, to the soul, to the vital body. You can settle down, it quiets you, because you're in the flow. You're being carried. Things are happening through you, not from you. Right? This is what the law of God does. Then it says, not only do you find rest for your soul, but these teachings will also stabilize you in wisdom, even if you're simple-minded. By attuning to the law or the teachings of God, your simple mind will be instructed by wisdom. That's why it doesn't mean you have to be educated, right? Because oftentimes education dumbs you down. PhD can sometimes stand for permanent head damage. So it doesn't mean that education is necessarily going to make you wise. It often doesn't. And if you've ever lived life a little bit and you've gone to the salt of the earth kinds of people, oftentimes their wisdom is unshakable and real. And this is what is being said here, that even simple or uneducated people can have this tremendous wisdom and insight by attuning to the law of God. Once their heart is open and they're devoted, God will instruct. And it's saying here that the testimonies of God are straight, they're reliable, and as a result of them being reliable, you'll have joy in your heart. You could trust things will work out. You're not on your own. You're not trying to do it in your own way. You've given your life over. It's like one of the things that's implied here, and we'll get more into it on Wednesday night, is that creation is covenant. In other words, when we are in the flow or the right relationship with creation, we have an intrinsic function as human beings, a job or a duty or a dharma to do as human beings. We have a function as humanity, the Adamic species. And so when we are in covenant with God, the idea of covenant is, if you keep covenant with me, says God and throughout the scriptures, I'll take care of you. I'll protect you. I'll supply all of your needs. I'll come to your rescue. I'll give you all of the instruction and the supplies that you need. It's a very personal and direct relationship. And this is why, remember now, when we're looking at nature and we hear cricket song and flow patterns of clouds and ocean and all of this stuff, it's connected to this higher Torah, this higher law. So in other words, this divine law or pattern is moving through the circuitry of creation. So when we're in covenant with this higher law, God speaks to us in a myriad of ways, right? So that nature becomes alive with divine language. And you'll know it's the divine looking at you through the eye of the dog or the little gecko or whatever. Like, you will find these touches all day long. You'll be patched in. into the divine language. That's why it will make your heart joyful. There are so many times where it's just like, oh my God, that was so real and touching, but nobody can see it or know it. If I said anything, they think I'm crazy. But it was that moment I got kissed. And we've probably all had those experiences, this intimacy. Right? Very sweet, very gentle, very solid, making joyful the heart. And it says that this law will illuminate your eyes so that you'll see in the dark. You'll no longer bump into things. You won't miss your exit. You'll see things as God sees them because you're aligning yourself with his deeper law, right? And then this is that the Torah of God, the law of God, the reverence of God, these are all interchangeable in the psalm. They purify, or rather, sorry, they are pure. And they're true or solid forever. So nothing will ever change that. So no matter what challenges you may be going through, and just had this conversation right before service, like this world can get really crazy, right? Really unhinged. But if you're following this deeper law of life, you'll be able to anchor. Like oftentimes God is called the rock. Often, very often. The rock, Evan Shetia, the foundation stone. So when you're in relationship or covenant with this presence, you're on the rock. And as David says in the Psalm, this rock is higher than me. So he takes me out of the pit, this miry, swampy pit, and he puts me on the rock. This is the image. So when you're trying to do it yourself, it's a struggle, and there's no sure footing when you're in the ego. You're in a miry place, a dark, smelly place. But then you go on the rock that's higher than your ego, and you're stabilized, you're secure. Let's see, anything else? Oh, this is good. So he then says, and we'll get more of this in Shantideva, he says, keep me, well, let's see. Who can discern their own mistakes, right? Who can suss out where we are blindsided, where we don't see ourselves as we really are? You know, this is one of the things why we hold our grievances and why we have these petty problems with people. It's because we don't see how we show up. So he's saying here, who can see their secret faults? Like, we're unconscious sometimes and we think we're right. But if we were to actually step out and see how we're treating that person, what we're saying to them, it's oftentimes, whoa, would you like that done to you? So he says, you know, who can discern their own mistakes? And then he says, cleanse me from these unperceived faults. Like, shine away my subconscious tendencies to self-sabotage my life. Cleanse me from these secret faults that show up unconscious to me. I'm not mindful, not watching my mind. And they wreck my relationships. They wreck my jobs at work. You know, like these things creep in like little nasties, like gremlins. And as we're going to see in the storyline within the Course in Miracles cameo that we'll look at in just a few minutes, it's a matter of sometimes when you're not allowing these secret faults to be dealt with and you allow them to accumulate, and they seem so will-o-wisp, like, you know, that was really just nothing. But it determines whether or not, in the story of the Course, you get the cab in New York on time, you know, without waiting out there on a very cold day. Like the cab will show up because you've cleansed yourself from these little secret faults. They interfere with the circuitry and how things show up and flow. I really want to impress that. We gunk up the pipes or the works. We block the energy flow with these secret faults. So David in the Psalm is saying, cleanse me of those. I want my system to run, efficiently and optimally. This is what health is. It's not just physical health. It's health that connects you to all the nested levels of creation in that divine flow. That's holism, health, healing, right? All from the same root. Let's see. Yeah, so cleanse me from unperceived faults, also from intentional sins. Restrain your servant. Let them not rule me. Then I shall be perfect, and I will be cleansed of the great transgression. What's the great transgression? Well, it's going off on my own and disconnecting from the divine matrix. And then when I do that, we can despoil the environment. We can rob our neighbor. We can have sex with our neighbor's wife. We can do all of these terrible things. Because once we start disconnecting from the higher language, it's just me and mine that makes sense. It's the law of my own desire that I follow, right? So that's the great transgression. That was taking the fruit. I don't want to steal my thunder for Wednesday night, but that's the idea. So the way of the Bodhisattva, Shantideva, so he says this, I am as if benumbed by sorcery, as if reduced to total mindlessness. I do not know what dulls my wits. Oh, what is it that has me in its grip? Anger, lust, these enemies of mine, are limbless and devoid of faculties. They have no bravery, no cleverness. How then have they reduced me to such slavery? So benumbed by sorcery. What's the sorcery? Entertaining these angry and lustful thoughts, the great transgression that disconnects us from this divine flow, where everything is a blessing. What we see also in the Bible is when we do this, when we disconnect from the divine flow, we go through what's called a disaster cycle. The disaster cycle, if you follow it throughout the Bible, it's very clearly patterned. I think it's no accident they knew what they were doing when they wrote these stories or had these lessons. The disaster cycle starts with the phrase, and they did what was right in their own eyes, following the lusts of their own heart. And then you'll find they'll go into the hand of the enemy. The Midianites, the Philistines, the Amorites, the Egyptians, whoever it is, those people are the anger, the lust symbolized. And then they go through this trial period. They break down. In other words, they get the fruit of their own desires handed back to them. Then as a result of the disaster, they cry out, and then God takes them out of the pit, puts them on the rock. And it isn't long after that they're going after the desire of their own hearts again and back down into the disaster cycle. The cycle of blessing, which is the antithesis of this, also clearly patterned within the Bible. The blessing cycle always starts with listening to God, hearing His speech, not the lusts of my own heart, or what is right in my own eyes. And as I hear, it says, then God will see for me, or God will see to this. So in other words, truth goes before me. I'm not trying to do it on my own. I'm actually a servant. I'm following. And what Shanti Deva is saying is, I'm either a slave to blessing, or I'm a slave to disaster. You're a slave either way. And then he's saying, these enemies of mine, they dwell within my mind, and at their pleasure injure me. All this I suffer meekly, unresenting. Thus my abject patience, all displaced. In other words, I'm so very patient with entertaining these forces within my mind that wreak havoc on my peace and my well-being. I just let them hang around. You know, again, these things are within these nested levels of language. If you're doing this in your psychology, and you've been doing it for a while and ignoring the signs, oftentimes people will come to symbolize these dysfunctional and destructive patterns that you've been thinking. So sometimes you let them live in your own house. Sleep in your own bed, right? These things, there's no, as it says in the Psalm, there's no speech or words where their language isn't heard. So in other words, if you start to open your eyes to what's really going on, enlightening your eyes with the law of life or the Dharma, the Torah, you begin to read your life. Everybody in your life is there on purpose, on cue, part of a narrative. And that narrative might be a disaster cycle, or that narrative may be a blessing cycle. You will start to read it because you're going to start quieting your mind and connecting to this deeper law of life, which will enlighten your eyes. Yes? I mean, just think about it. If any of this is true, if it has any value, I really want to say holy blank, but wow. Like, how amazing. Like just again, like this is, again, we're so viscerally cut off. Like all of our light pollution, we can't even look up at the night sky anymore. But if we could do that and see the trillions of stars and galaxies and everything's kind of just suspended in empty space and we're going around a nuclear reactor at 30,000 miles an hour. It's just like, wow. Is this all by chance? Is it a glorious accident? Or are these teachings across the globe really pointing us to something truly glorious that we've ignored and rejected and forgotten? To our demise. Because look at the world. It's not going to be fixed with technology. That's only a very small part of these higher levels. All of that needs to be integrated. It's not technology's bad, but if it's not integrated to the law of life, it'll be a technology of death, as we see. A little more from Shantideva. This is from the chapter Vigilant Introspection. All those who fail to understand the secret of the mind, the greatest of all things, although they wish for joy in sorrow's end, will wander to no purpose, uselessly. That's a huge statement. Listen. All those who fail to understand the secret of the mind, the greatest of all things, not your brain, your mind. Your brain is a transducer for your mind. The mind is unseen, vast, Although, those who fail to understand the great secret of the mind, although they wish for joy and sorrow's end, will wander to no purpose. It'll be like hell, right? Seeking for water in the desert, right? Wandering in the wilderness. That's what Shantideva is saying. If you neglect the greatest of all things, which is your mind, then life will not be enjoyable, even though you want it to be. You'll never find what you're looking for. Therefore, he says, I will take in hand and well protect this mind of mine. What use to me are many disciplines if I can't guard and discipline my mind? When in wild, unruly crowds, I'm careful and attentive of my wounds. Likewise, when in evil company, this wound, my mind, I'll constantly protect. So the image he gives later is like if you're in a very crowded place and you have a broken arm and you're trying to walk through that crowd, you're going to protect that broken arm very carefully so people aren't bumping into it. And he's saying in the same way, if you know yourself well, if you get around unruly or evil people, if you've noticed this, sometimes like the worst or the least common denominator of your character comes up. And it's like when you're around the wrong people, you kind of just easily get in with them. And so Shantideva is saying like this, don't hurt yourself as if you had a broken arm. We have a broken mind in that regard. We need to protect it carefully when we're around people that may draw out the baser qualities of our character. Be aware of that. And then all you who would protect your minds, maintain your mindfulness and introspection. Guard them both at cost of life and limb. I join my hands beseeching you. Protect your mind. Now, it's not just like evil, unruly people, but it's also, if you get around people who have a really strong victim narrative. And what you don't realize, as the Torah of God lightens your eyes, sometimes you can feel those gossamer threads of their victim narrative kind of going on to you saying, like, feed me. Indulge my victim narrative. Tell me how bad it is. Tell me how you feel sorry for me, right? And so you can feel that. You get kind of pulled into their force field. And so Shantideva is saying this as well. It's like, protect your mind from that. Don't strengthen their ego narrative. Strengthen the spirit that they are. That's true empathy. That's true love. You don't want to reinforce the victim. You want to reinforce that they have the power. They have the strength. They're doing this to themselves. They're miscreating their life because they're out of their own divine flow pattern. That's all that's going on. Those disabled by ill health are helpless, powerless to act. The mind, when likewise cramped by ignorance, is impotent and cannot do its work. Just said it right there. When we are clouded by our ignorance, we're ill. Again, it's confronting, but it's healing. For those who have no introspection, though they hear the teachings, ponder them, or meditate, like water seeping from a leaking jar, their learning will not settle in their memories. So again, if these teachings go against your belief system, like if you still want to be the victim, or you still want to indulge your lusts, or you still want to hold your grudges and grievances, these teachings will come in, you'll be like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Oh, the Buddha was cool, man. And then you get up, and you're right back into your groove of darkness and misalignment, like water going through a leaky jar. None of the teachings will stick. Lack of introspection is a thief. It slinks behind when mindfulness abates, and all the merit we have gathered in, lack of introspection steals it away, and we go back into these lower realms of vibration. So whenever you're finding yourself depressed, overwhelmed, sad, confused, conflicted, lack of introspection, we're allowing it to seep in. We're not being vigilant in watching our mind. So he says, lack of introspection is a thief. Defilements are a band of robbers looking for their chance to injure us. They steal our virtue when the moment comes and batter out the lives of happy destinies. So he's saying then mindfulness needs to be stationed as a sentinel, a guard upon the threshold of the mind. Introspection will be likewise there, returning when forgotten or dispersed. Okay? So training the mind, watching the mind, introspection, insight, becoming aware of our secret faults, wanting to purify them. Right? All of this comes about, and then we can drop deeper into that attunement with the law of life, the resonance of divine language. And just know, like when I'm saying this, it's for me. I'm not trying to say I got all this together and you guys got to do it now. I was just thinking, I'm so grateful for these teachings. Like I'm constantly needing to be checked and to be, attuned in my own ways, because we're constantly like an airplane going off course. It's like we have to constantly reset. Right? So it's moment by moment, vigilance, watching the mind. If we think that we can put it on autopilot like the Tesla, well, we know what's in the news right now. They're all being recalled because that autopilot doesn't work. You can't live your life on autopilot. You'll wreck it and you'll hurt people. Right? So everything's a symbol. The language of God is in the car manufacturer, right? This is the way it's working. And so we have to look at how moment by moment, if we're not vigilantly watching our mind, then this lack of introspection will come in like a thief. Shantideva just said that. It's like lurking, it's lurking behind, waiting for us to drop our guard. But, Shantideva also says, you don't have to be so stiff and dried up. Like if you're in a party or something, he even says this, like, relax, enjoy yourself, But if you're, you got to get right back on track to watch the mind. So, A Course in Miracles, in the complete edition, it has these really valuable stories at the back of the book. They're called cameos, and they're anecdotal stories about mostly Helen and her colleague Bill, and how the Course was coming to them over time, and how they were adjusting to this new information. And in this section, the cameo is 14, it's called The Chain of Miscreation. It's this very notion of when you don't watch your mind carefully, what happens. And I just think it's a really nice topper to our discussion this morning. So, as you probably know, Helen, was getting these clear transmissions or channelings from Jesus, right? If you can buy any of this. And so Helen is being guided very clearly, audibly, by the voice. And so the voice tells Helen to tell Bill that the reason why he was so strained today is because he allowed himself a number of fear-producing attitudes, right, that cause strain. They were fleeting enough to be more will-o-wisps than serious will errors, but unless he watches this kind of thing, he will find the notes fearful, and knowing him well, he'll distance himself from the teaching. So this is the subtlety. Very will-o-wisp, like whispers. Oh, you can't do that. That's beyond your potential. You should still hate that. Like, these are the things, like, how dare they think that? How dare they? So these things come in and we entertain them. And as he says that if we're not watching this kind of thing, he says, we will find the notes fearful. And he's referring to the teachings of the Course when he says notes. So when we have, as the Buddha said, when our mind goes into impure thinking, then trouble follows us, because the impure thoughts that we now identify with are antagonistic to the teaching. We don't want the teaching. The teaching actually kind of hurts, or it bothers us, or it's boring, or it's annoying, or I don't have time for that. And it's only because of the atmosphere in the mind created by these fearful will-o-wisp thoughts. It really is a mind game. And when you begin to learn how to play it, you'll have less and less tolerance for mind wandering, because it hurts. It creates disaster and struggle and strain. So then it says this. Again, Helen is channeling this. Bill, having already weakened himself, was very unmiracle-minded, first by not asking Dora if she wanted a lift in the cab. So they lived and worked in New York City, right? And they get out of work, and they're on the curb, and Dora, I'm assuming, it doesn't say in the story, is a colleague. And because she did something stupid, it says in the story, Bill was kind of peeved at Dora. And because he was peeved at Dora, because he was allowing all of these fearful thoughts in all day, he couldn't see Dora who, as she really was, and forgive and be loving and compassionate. He became, pissed off at her. And as a result of being in an upset state at the curb with Dora and Helen waiting for a cab in the cold, he didn't ask Dora if she wanted to get in the cab. He wasn't going to let her in, even though they were going in the same destination. Even if she didn't want the cab, she would have been able to use the thought well. These are subtle but really powerful insights. The fact that I'm gesturing in kindness to you, do you want to share a cab with me? No, I'm good. The energy of that kindness that I just extended to you gets recycled within your system as kind energy, and it will produce more of its kind. So she could have used that thought well. It would have uplifted her. There is probably no human error that is more fear-provoking than countering any form of error with error. As Buddha says in the Dhammapada, you can never heal hatred with hatred. You can only heal love with heal hatred with love. The result can be highly inflammable by reacting to Dora's stupidity with his own stupidity. All of the elements which are virtually certain to engender fear have been provided. So reinforcement of fear. Now, the reason why this is going to makes sense in light of everything we're saying, is it shows up not only in your internal state, but now you're waiting for a cab in the freezing cold, and there are no cabs coming. And you never associate that it's my own entertaining of these fear-based thoughts and my grievances that I'm not extending kindness to people that are causing this physical situation to look the way it does. So remember, everything is in a nested circuit of language, all intercalibrated and all responding to your focus, your thoughts, your intentions, your motivation. So you're directing the flow pattern of your identity center. And then everything else recalibrates to that. If you're not in harmony with the law of life, you cause storms and upsets and delays. Right? A little bit more here. So Bill should note that this is one of the few times that he had to wait for a cab. He thought he took care of it by holding the door of a cab, which did come for that lady, but he was misguided in this belief. So this gets even better. Actually, by giving this cab to her, he was very unkind to you. So Bill recognized he was being a jerk to Dora. And he also realized that I'm waiting a long time for this cab. He has enough knowledge at this point to go, there's probably a connection here. Let me be kind. So what he then tried to do on his own is fix the problem. So when the cab finally showed up, there was another lady waiting, and he said, go ahead, you take the cab. And this was his gesture of saying, I'm a good boy. I'm going to clean up my mess. But because he's doing it in his own human way, with his own view of what's right and wrong, it wasn't foolproof, because now Helen is freezing and waiting with Bill for the cab. So this didn't solve the problem. It just pissed Helen off. So it didn't fix anything. So he says he thought he took care of it by holding the door of the cab, which did come for that lady, but he was misguided in this belief. Actually, by giving this cab to her, he was very unkind to you. It was quite apparent that you were extremely cold and also very late. The idea that giving her the cab would atone for his previous errors was singularly out of place and well calculated to lead to further error. So trying to fix it produced more of it. Can you relate? If instead of attempting to atone on his own, he had asked for guidance, then there would have been no difficulty whatever in the cab situation. It was not necessary that anyone wait at all. We never think to go upstairs when we're having issues. Well, I could fix it down here. I'll do it on my own. If he had only stopped and asked for guidance, things could have reset, and the voice of the divine would have spoken through that situation, and the things would have been healed, balanced. So that's the anecdote, and then this is a really interesting summary that's given in light of all of that. Okay, do it quickly. So this is the comment now by Robert Perry. Jesus' immediate reason for this whole discourse was to create better learning conditions for studying A Course in Miracles. Yet in the process, he ends up providing an in-depth look into how we typically live our days and how he wants us to live them instead. The typical day he sketches here is governed by the chain of miscreation, right? Things keep cascading in the wrong way, right? by errors that beget long chains of additional errors, disaster cycles. In particular, unloving thoughts and unguided decisions lead to hurtful actions. This hurtfulness toward others then returns to us and then goes back out from us to still more people. We strain to fix things, but our solutions tend to cause yet more problems. It's as if our initial errors cast unwanted seeds into a garden, and even as we reach to pull up the resulting weeds, new seeds spill from our hands. We are caught in what feels like an unbreakable cycle. Our perception of everyone and everything gets pulled into this cycle, making the whole world look ugly. So the day that Jesus is teaching Helen and Bill to have is just the opposite. We can see this day as having three components. One, policing the mind. We just read all of that in Shantideva. Introspection, diligent guarding of the mind. Mind watching and thought correction. Okay, so when Jesus said Bill allowed himself fear-producing attitudes toward Dora, or when he refers to Helen's irritation, the implication is that Bill and Helen ideally should have been watching for such reactions and then moving to correct them. So as soon as you see that, you recognize, stop. We didn't get to that reading in Shantideva, it's just too much. But he says, as soon as you sense these destructive patterns or disturbing emotions, you stop. Don't act on them. Don't speak from that place. Discipline the mind, and then ask for guidance. So that's the second, ask for guidance. And then third, when you're asking for guidance, the third part naturally follows that you begin to give kind, healing, gracious, respectful, and courteous behaviors and thoughts. And this is how the blessing cycle begins to emerge in your life. All right? So I almost made it. I'm a little past. I apologize. Blue bag's going to go around. If you're joining on Facebook or YouTube, the link is there below. Just click on it. And thank you for your generous offerings to the 8 a.m. service. I greatly appreciate that. Okay, so any thoughts or questions or comments? Good. Okay, blessing the offering and the givers of the offering with this intention to learn, grow, and heal all of our secret faults so that we can become channels of blessing in the world. And may this offering be charged with symbolizing that in whatever way, shape, or form. And so it is. Amen. All right, let's seal the deal. So as we rest within the core of the heart, just feel this deeper sense of warmth and connection to divine presence and this priceless gift that's been bestowed upon all of us, that we can direct our thoughts and be channels of divine creation. And in this relationship or covenant, we will come to know in every moment that the light of God surrounds us. The love of God enfolds us. The power of God protects us. And the presence of God watches over us. Wherever we are, God is. Amen. Thank you, everyone. We had a nice time, I'm hoping, and we'll see you again soon, maybe tomorrow night, 7:15. Of course, in Miracles class in the sanctuary. Oh, yeah.